Chapter 1. The Woman in the Dust. The sun was melting into the horizon, spilling its blood-red light across the endless stretch of prairie. Heat shimmered over the land, even the dying day, and the air carried the tang of dust and dry sage. Colt Harrigan rode slow, the worn leather of his saddle creaking with each step of his bay gelding. Jasper. His eyes were fixed ahead, but his hand rested easy near the butt of his Colt .45. Out here, a man learned to keep company with his weapon. A whisper of movement caught his eye. A shape slumped in the dry creek bed to his right. At first, he thought it might be a coyote worrying a carcass. But as Jasper drew closer, Colt saw a human form, wrapped tight in a dirt-caked blanket. Jasper's hooves crunched over cracked earth as Colt swung down from the saddle. Dust swirled around his boots in the evening wind. The figure stirred faintly, the blanket shifting just enough for him to catch the outline of a face, too thin, too pale. Then a voice, so faint it could have been mistaken for wind. "Just kill me fast." Colt froze, one hand still holding Jasper's reins. It wasn't the words that stopped him cold, but the way she said them, like she'd already made peace with dying. He crouched, the leather of his duster whispering as he moved. "You hurt bad." Her head turned slightly, and a strand of dark, dust-matted hair fell across her cheek. Eyes, sharp even through exhaustion, met his. "Don't ask questions. Just do it." He narrowed his gaze. "Ain't in the business of killing strangers, ma'am. You will once you see." Her voice cracked, but there was no plea in it, just certainty. The wind picked up, carrying the distant howl of a coyote across the plains. Coltscott told him to walk away. The West had a way of eating folks alive, and some were too far gone to save. But something in her eyes, something stubborn, made him stay. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for the edge of the blanket. She flinched, but didn't stop him. The coarse fabric peeled away, and the setting sun caught the marks on her skin. Colt stumbled back a step, breath-catching. Her arms were cross-hatched with bruises, some fresh, some fading. A deep burn seared into her left shoulder, raw, blistered, forming the crude brand of a circle bisected by a jagged slash. He knew that mark, the crimson jackals. His jaw tightened. Hell, her gaze didn't waver. "Now you see. Best put a bullet in me before they find me. It'll be kinder." He stood silent for a long moment, the prairie wind tugging at his coat. She thought she was broken beyond saving, and maybe she was right, but Colt wasn't about to hand her over to buzzards, nor to the men who'd done this. "Ma'am," he said finally, voice low, "I reckon you're still breathing, and that means you got a chance. You want to die, you'll have to do it yourself." Something flickered in her eyes, annoyance, disbelief, maybe even a trace of hope she didn't want to admit to. Her lips trembled, though whether from cold or rage, he couldn't tell. "They'll kill you for even talking to me." "Let him try." He crouched again, sliding an arm beneath her knees and another behind her back. She was light, too light, and stiff as a plank in his arms. "You're a damn fool," she muttered against his chest. "Been called worse." Jasper shifted uneasily as Colt mounted with her in his arms, settling her carefully in front of him. She didn't lean into him, but she didn't pull away either. The smell of dust and faint lavender clung to her beneath the smoke and blood. The sky deepened indigo as they rode, the first stars winking awake overhead. The land stretched silent around them, but Colt kept scanning the shadows. Out here, danger traveled fast on horseback. When the lantern glow of his ranch finally appeared on the ridge, he felt her stir faintly. She didn't speak, but he caught her watching the light the way a lost traveler might watch a fire in the dark. Colt knew then, whether she liked it or not, he wasn't about to let her die. Chapter 2. A Stranger in the Bunkhouse. The night air was cool by the time Colt rode into the yard. the barn casting long shadows under flickering lantern light. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a lone coyote called to the moon. Jasper snorted as Colt swung down, the boards of the porch creaking under his boots. Ilera was still in his arms, though he didn't know her name yet. She'd gone quiet during the ride, her head tilted slightly away from him, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, as if expecting trouble to come galloping out of it. The main house was warm and well-kept, but Colt didn't take her there. A woman with the crimson jackal's mark wasn't just a risk. She was a beacon for trouble. Instead, he carried her to the bunkhouse, a sturdy pine building that smelled faintly of linseed oil and horse tack. Inside, the lamplight threw gold across the plank floor. A single iron bed sat in the corner, sheets folded crisp. A wood stove stood cold but ready, with kindling stacked neatly beside it. Colt eased her down onto the mattress, and she stiffened as if even that softness might betray her. "I'll fetch water," he said, straightening. Her voice followed him, sharp despite the weakness in it. "Don't waste your time. I won't be here long." Colt paused at the doorway. "You aim to leave, that's your choice. But you're not walking anywhere tonight." Her eyes narrowed, the fire in them a stark contrast to the bruises on her skin. She didn't answer. When he returned with a tin basin and a cloth, she was sitting upright, the blanket draped loosely around her shoulders. She glanced at the water, then at him, and something in her expression said she didn't trust him to come near. "You can tend yourself if you prefer," he said evenly, setting the basin within reach. "But you want to get those burns clean, else they'll fester." A tense beat passed before she dipped the cloth and began dabbing at the brand on her shoulder. Colt busied himself with the stove, coaxing a flame to life. The wood caught with a sharp crack, and heat began to seep into the room. After a while, she spoke, her voice quieter now. "Why'd you bring me here?" Colt fed another log into the stove, not looking at her right away. "Didn't see much sense in leaving you for the coyotes. That's it? No reward you're after? No bargain with the jackals?" He turned then, his gaze steady. "Ma'am, I don't make deals with snakes. And I sure as hell don't hand folk back to the ones that broke him." Her eyes softened for just a moment, barely there, but he caught it before she masked again. A gust of wind rattled the shutters, and the bunkhouse seemed to draw in closer, holding the quiet between them. Outside, a horse stamped in its stall. "You got a name?" he asked. "Ilera." She said like a challenge, as though daring him to use it. "Colt Harrigan," he replied. "This here's my land. You'll be safe tonight." Her lips curved, but not in a smile. "Safe ain't real, not out here." Colt didn't argue. He knew she was right. Instead, he pulled a wool blanket from a chest at the foot of the bed and draped it over her. "Sleep if you can. I'll keep watch." She looked up at him then, studying his face as if searching for cracks. Finding none, she turned away, but her shoulders eased just slightly beneath the blanket. Colt stepped outside into the moonlight, leaning on the porch rail. The prairie stretched black and silent in every direction. Somewhere out there, men with red/brands were looking for her. He could feel it in his bones. And though he didn't know why yet, the thought of them finding her here set his jaw like stone. Chapter 3. Tracks in the Dust. Dawn leaked pale and cold across the prairie, a wash of gray-blue that turned due to silver and dust to ash. Colt Harrigan cinched his saddle tight while the windmill creaked overhead, squealing like an old hinge with every turn. The herd lowed in the east pasture, a rolling comfort he measured his mornings by. Today, though, the air felt different, prickly at the back of his neck, like a rattler somewhere under the porch. He left Jasper tied and walked the fence line with his Winchester resting easy in the crook of his arm. Coyotes had worked the wire in the night, but it wasn't teeth that bothered him. 50 yards shy of the dry creek bed, Colt crouched. The ground still held the night's cool and, more importantly, fresh sign. Horse tracks, 3 sets. 2 shod, 1 not. The unshod gelding dragged its right hind slightly, clipping crescents into hardpan every 4th step. Whoever rode him was careful, keeping to the mesquite shadows, but the prints cut across his land bold as a signature. Colt followed the trail to the old cottonwood that leaned like a tired man over the creek bed. There, tucked into the roots, he found a tobacco twist pressed flat and a still wet match head, sulphur sharp as it stung his nose. He straightened, eyes cutting toward the horizon. The sun hauled itself over the rim of the world, setting the sage to glowing. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a magpie barked. Colt scanned the ridgeline. Nothing but empty sky and silence too loud for comfort. Back at the yard, the bunkhouse door was cracked. Ilera stood behind the screen, barefoot, blanket pulled tight, hair braided back with ruthless care. She wasn't shaking. She was measuring. "You walk quiet," she said. "You watch everything," he answered, laying the rifle across his forearm. 3 riders crossed the creek in the night. Her mouth flattened. "You sure?" "I ain't guessing." She glanced past him to the east pasture, then to the barn, as if mapping escape routes on the air. Could be ranch hands from the next property. They don't smoke jackal twists. He held up the flattened tobacco like a court exhibit. Crimson boys favor these. Cheap mean, and they stink like sin. The blanket tightened at her throat. No fear showed on her face, but her knuckles were white as bleached bone. "How close?" "Close enough to taste my water." She looked at the basin near the stove, at the neat stack of kindling he'd laid last night, at the bed she hadn't fully disturbed. "I won't be your trouble." "A little late for that," Colt said, soft, not unkind. He pointed toward the main house. "I got coffee on. You drink. You might stop trying to stand on pride alone." They ate in a quiet broken by spoon against tin and the occasional click of Jasper's bit out front. Through the open kitchen window drifted the town's far-off sounds. Saloon laughter carried by memory. Clinking spurs on a boardwalk he'd walked 1,000 times. Redwater was 5 miles and 1 bad decision away. "Who branded you?" he asked without looking at her, as if asking whether she took sugar. Her spoon paused midair. "You know who. I want to hear it from you." She set the spoon down and folded her hands in her lap, a schoolmarm's pose that didn't fit the scars on her wrists. "The Crimson Jackals. Vance Mallory's crew." Colt's jaw worked, the muscle ticking once. "Mallory." He said it like a nail hammered into wood. "I figured as much." "He won't stop," she said. "Not while I'm breathing." "Then we don't make it easy." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "You say we like I'm not already dead weight." He topped her tin cup with coffee. "I seen dead weight. It don't look back this steady." The morning warmed quick. Colt strung new wire with one ear on the horizon, and the other tuned to Ilera's footfalls around the bunkhouse. She stayed close to the doorway, the shade a hiding place and a vantage both. Twice he caught her flinch at nothing, as if expecting a hand on her shoulder that never came. When the wind shifted, it carried the barn's sweet hay smell and a faint trace of lavender from her skin, something stubborn that refused to be burned out. Near noon, he rode the perimeter again. The tracks that had cut the creek at dawn wound west toward the ridges, then doubled back, then faded. Scouts, testing fences, testing nerves. He found a boot scrape on a boulder and the faintest smear of red clay where no red clay should be. When he returned, Ilera was at the water trough, sleeves rolled to the elbow, washing dust from her face. The brand on her shoulder looked angrier in the sun. She didn't flinch when the water stung it. She saw him looking and lifted her chin instead of hiding. "They're close," he said. "I know." No tremor, no theatrics, just the simple truth of it. You run. They'll run you down the flats. I don't run. Good. He nodded to the bunkhouse. There's a spare scattergun under the cot. You use it if I ain't the one opening that door. Her gaze flicked to the doorway, then back to him. You planning on dying for me, rancher? Planning on feeding my herd supper and putting my head on my own pillow. He shifted the Winchester to the crook of his arm. If dying happens in between, well, I ain't partial to it. Something loosened in her posture. Maybe the smallest thread of trust. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stepped closer, the dust kicking up around her bare feet like smoke. Vance Mallory thinks fear is a bridle, she said quietly. He learned my name so he could yank on it. He won't expect a man to say no. Then let's surprise him. Late afternoon drained to copper. Shadows lengthened, and the world went quiet in the hell-breath way it gets before trouble. Colt checked the rifle once more, then looked to Alara. Stay to the light after sundown, he told her. Dark makes brave men stupid. She tilted her head, a near smile ghosting her mouth. Light makes cowards honest. They stood a moment, the wind combing the grass, the sky bruising toward dusk. Somewhere a coyote started up, thin and far. Alara's eyes tracked the horizon, as if reading a message written in heat shimmer and dust. Crimson jackals, she said, tasting the words like a vow she was tired of keeping. They won't owe me again. Colt tipped his hat low, as if saluting the declaration. Not while I've got breath to argue. The prairie answered with silence, and the two of them, strangers bound by a mark and a choice, waited for first star to show, and with it, whatever the night would bring. Chapter 4. The Saloon's Whisper. The town of Redwater simmered under midday sun, its single main street shimmering in the heat like the surface of a skillet. Colt Harrigan reined Jasper to a slow walk, the horse's hooves sending up lazy puffs of dust with each step. Porch boards creaked as townsfolk leaned out to watch him ride in, some with curiosity, some with a tight-mouthed wariness reserved for men who lived too far from the law. Colt tipped his hat to no one in particular and tied Jasper outside the Silver Spur Saloon, where the front windows were open to let the stale air out and the trouble in. Inside, the smell hit first, whiskey, sweat, and a hint of cigar smoke hanging low under the ceiling fans. The piano was silent, replaced by the shuffle of cards and the occasional burst of laughter from a corner table. He stepped onto the warped floorboards, his spurs clicking sharp in the quiet. Men looked up from their hands long enough to decide whether or not he was worth noticing, then bent back to their games. Colt headed for the bar, his boots whispering against sawdust. "Morning, Harrigan," said the barkeep, a tall fellow with arms like fence posts and a beard that hadn't seen soap in a month. "Coffee," Colt said. "Hot as you can stand it." The barkeep snorted but poured, sliding the tin cup his way. Colt took it black, sipping slow as he scanned the room. In the far corner, for men sat a poker table. The green felt worn thin where coins and cards had traded hands 1,000 times. Their voices were low, but the room was quiet enough for fragments to reach him. "Big price for her head." "Fire in her eyes," they said. "Crimson jackals don't pay for ghosts." Colt's grip on the coffee tightened. He didn't have to guess who they were talking about. One of the men, thin, with a scar curling from his ear to his collar, leaned back and raised his voice a notch. "Word is she ain't far from here. Mallory's putting silver on the table for anyone who delivers her warm. Twice that if she's still breathing enough to talk." Another man chuckled, a dry rasp. "Hell, I'll settle for half. She's just a girl." "Not just a girl," Scar said. "She's the one who put a knife in Tully Finch's throat last winter." Colt set the coffee down slow, careful not to draw eyes. But the conversation was already rolling his way. The man at the next stool, a wiry bounty hunter named Briggs, all elbows and smirk, turned to him. You been out on that stretch north of the creek lately, Harrigan? Colt met his gaze, voice level. What's it to you? Briggs's grin widened. Just wondering if you've seen anything unusual. New faces, maybe. Folks who don't belong. Colt didn't blink. If I had, they wouldn't be your business. That earned a low chuckle from someone at the poker table. Briggs's smirk faltered, but he didn't push it. Instead, he drained his glass and sauntered toward the door, his spurs ringing like little alarms. The barkeep leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. Jackalsby been sniffing around since sunup. Saw two of 'em water their mounts at the trough by the smithy. Colt tossed a coin on the counter and finished his coffee in one swallow. Thanks. On his way out, the light hit him like a hammer, bright and unflinching. He untied Jasper and swung up, the leather creaking under him. His eyes swept the street. The blacksmith's hammer paused mid-strike. A woman hurried her child indoors, and two men lounged near the water trough with the easy patience of predators. Cole kept his face turned toward the road out of town, but his hand rested near the Winchester in the scabbard. He didn't need to look twice to know those men would remember his face. As Jasper carried him away from Redwater, the sound of the saloon lingered. Cards slapping, coins clinking, and the low hiss of men trading names for silver. By the time the prairie opened wide before him, Colt had made up his mind. Ilera had until nightfall to decide whether she'd stay and fight or run for the hills, because the jackals weren't just close anymore. They were already breathing down his neck. And in the west, once a bounty's in the air, blood is never far behind. Chapter 5, Firelight Confessions. The wind began its restless song before sundown, whispering to the cottonwoods, rattling loose shingles on the barn. The clouds rolled in low and heavy, turning the sky the color of tarnished silver. By the time Colt returned from checking the western fence line, the first cool drops of rain had begun to darken the dust in the yard. In the bunkhouse, the air was thick with the scent of burning pine. Ilera sat near the stove, her knees pulled up beneath the blanket, a tin mug cradled in her hands. Firelight flickered over her face, throwing shadows across her cheekbones and making her eyes look deeper, darker. Colt shut the door against the wind, hanging his hat and slicker on the peg. "Storm's coming hard," he said. "We'll get rain enough to drown a fence post before morning." She didn't look at him right away, just stared into the flames as if reading some memory inside them. "Storms don't scare me." Colt stepped closer, pulling off his gloves. "What does?" The corner of her mouth tightened. Men who smile before they draw a knife. Silence settled, broken only by the crack and pop of sap burning in the pine logs. Colt leaned against the wall near the stove, crossing his arms. "You want to tell me what the jackals wanted with you?" Her gaze flicked up, meeting his. There was no trembling there, just a hard, guarded shine. Same thing they want from every rancher's daughter, with a bit of land to her name. Control. My father wouldn't sell. Wouldn't hand over our cattle, our water rights. So they burned us out. Took him first, then came for me. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands betrayed her, tightening around the mug until her knuckles paled. Colt's jaw flexed, and the brand. Her eyes shifted away. A warning to anyone else who might think about saying no to Vance Mallory. You wear his mark, you're his property. Or at least, that's the story he tells. The wind moaned through the cracks in the shutters, and rain began to tap against the roof. Colt crouched by the stove, feeding another log to the fire. That mark don't make you his. Not now. Not ever. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then her shoulders eased the tiniest bit, and she let out a breath that might have been the start of a laugh. You talk like you believe that. I do. He straightened, meeting her gaze without flinching. Seen too many good folks let some outlaws say so define 'em. Don't intend to watch it happen again. She studied him then, as if weighing his words, testing their strength like a rope before trusting her weight to it. The fire threw a warm glow across the hard plains of his face, and she found herself wondering if he'd always looked like a man who decided where he stood long before the shooting started. "You don't even know me," she said softly. Colt stepped closer, his boots making the floorboards creak. "I know enough. I know you didn't break, even when they try to grind you down. I know you're still here, and that means something." Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm. Colt moved to the cupboard, pulled down a second mug, and poured coffee from the pot hanging near the stove. He handed it to her, without ceremony, the steam curling between them. She accepted it, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. Something tightened in her chest, something she hadn't felt in longer than she cared to admit. "I thought I was done feeling anything," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Colt didn't push, didn't ask. He just settled into the chair across from her, coffee in hand, and let the silence speak for them both. The storm outside had swallowed the world whole, leaving only the glow of the fire, the smell of pine smoke, and the low hum of two people who, for all their differences, knew what was to lose and still keep going. Ilera looked at him again, and for the first time since he'd found her in the dust, there was something other than defiance in her eyes. Something warmer, more dangerous. "You're a stubborn man, Colt Harrigan," she said. A slow grin tugged at his mouth. "And you're a hard woman to scare." The fire popped, the wind howled, and for a heartbeat, the danger outside the walls seemed far away. Chapter 6. Blood on the Prairie. The first light of dawn was just brushing the ridge when Colt Harrigan heard it. Hooves, more than one set, riding hard. He was already on the porch with his Winchester before the yard came into view. The horizon behind the cottonwoods boiled with dust. "Ilera," he called, voice low but sharp. She was at the bunkhouse door in seconds, barefoot, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak. "What is it?" "Riders." The word hung in the cold morning air, heavy with all it didn't say. Colt didn't need to tell her who. The dust cloud split into shapes. 5 riders, dark against the rising sun, rifles across their saddles. At their head was a tall man in a black duster, the sun glinting off the silver conchos on his hat. Even from here, Colt knew that posture, that way of owning the ground he rode on. Vance Mallory. "They found me," Ilera said, her voice steady, but her grip on the blanket whitened her knuckles. "They found us," Colt corrected, "and they're about to wish they hadn't." He ducked into the bunkhouse, emerging with a cartridge belt slung low and a second rifle. He handed it to her. "You know how to use one of these?" She took it without hesitation, checking the chamber like a woman who'd handled steel before. "I'm a rancher's daughter, remember?" The riders slowed as they neared the yard, spreading into a half circle. Mallory's smile was lazy, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Morning, Harrigan," he called. His voice carried easily over the distance, like he'd practiced making himself heard before the shooting started. "You've got something of mine." Colt rested the Winchester against his shoulder. "Only thing I got's mine, Mallory." The outlaw chuckled. "That girl belongs to the Crimson Jackals." Ilera stepped forward, rifle in hand. "I don't belong to anyone, least of all you." Mallory's smile cooled. "Now, Ilera, that's not how we talk to old friends." "Friends don't brand each other like cattle," she said, raising the rifle a hair. That did it. Mallory's hand twitched, and one of his men lifted his weapon. Colt didn't wait. The Winchester came to his shoulder, the crack splitting the morning air. The man toppled backward out of the saddle before his gun cleared leather. Chaos bloomed in an instant. Gunfire snapping, horses screaming, dust exploding from kicked-up earth. Colt dropped another rider with a clean shot to the chest. then swung behind a water trough as a bullet splintered the post he'd been leaning on. Ilera fired from the bunkhouse porch, her braids snapping against her back as she racked the lever and fired again. One of Mallory's men spun in the saddle, clutching his side, and bolted toward the open prairie. Mallory dismounted, stalking forward with a revolver in one hand and a Bowie knife in the other. Colt rose from cover, sighting down the Winchester, but Mallory ducked behind the hitching post, firing blind. The round screamed past Colt's ear and buried itself in the porch rail. "Ilera!" Colt barked. "Inside. I'm not leaving you." Her voice was fierce, and the crack of her rifle punctuated the words. She caught one of the jackals in the thigh, sending him tumbling into the dust. The fight turned in a breath. Their numbers cut in half. The jackals began to break. Colt stepped from cover, his boots pounding the yard, and leveled his Winchester at Mallory. The outlaw froze, the Bowie knife glinting in the morning light. "Your ride's over," Colt said. Mallory's eyes flicked past him to Ilera. "You can't hide from me forever, girl." "Don't have to," she shot back. "I just have to be faster." She fired. The bullet struck him square in the shoulder, spinning him to the dirt. His revolver clattered away, and before Colt could close the distance, one of his remaining men hauled him onto a horse. They tore off across the prairie, leaving only hoofbeats and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Colt watched them go, chest heaving. The yard was littered with the bodies of the ones who wouldn't be riding back. The sun was higher now, burning through the dust, painting the prairie gold again. Ilera lowered her rifle, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what she'd just done. Colt stepped toward her, resting a hand on her arm. "You're still standing," he said. "So are you," she replied, and for a moment they just stood there, the wind tugging at their coats, the danger not gone but driven back. Chapter 7, The Last Stand. The rain had stopped by dusk, leaving the prairie slick and smelling of wet sage. Clouds hung low and bruised, hiding the stars. Colt Harrigan knew the jackals hadn't run far. Men like Mallory didn't take a beating and slink away. They circled back like wolves, waiting for the right moment to sink their teeth in. That moment came just after dark. Colt was in the yard, lantern in hand, when he caught the faint rhythm of hooves under the night wind. He doused the light instantly. The sound grew. 6, maybe 7 riders, approaching slow. "Ilera!" he called in a sharp whisper. She appeared from the bunkhouse, rifle in one hand, hair loose from its braid and falling over her shoulders. "How many?" "Enough to finish it." They moved without wasted words, slipping into the barn. The big double doors swung shut behind them, the smell of hay and horse thick in the warm dark. Colt barred the doors with a heavy timber, then handed her a revolver. "Stay behind the grain sacks. Keep low. If they breach, don't wait for me to tell you to shoot." She didn't argue, just checked the cylinder and slid into position. The first impact rattled the barn doors, dust drifting down from the rafters. A voice rang out, "Mallory's, slick as oil." "Harrigan, you think a couple of walls will save you? Give me the girl, and I'll let you live to see another sunrise." Colt leaned against a support beam, Winchester ready. "You had your chance to walk away, Mallory." The reply was a hammer cocking. Then the night erupted. Bullets tore through the barn siding, splinters raining down. Horses inside the stalls kicked and whinnied, the air filling with the smell of their panic. Colt fired through a gap in the boards, hearing a grunt and the thud of a body hitting wet ground. Ilera's revolver barked from the shadows, dropping a man who tried to flank the side door. She reloaded with quick, practiced hands, her eyes sharp and steady even in the flickering lantern light. Mallory's voice came again, closer now. "You can't keep her forever, Harrigan. She belongs to me." Something in Ilera snapped at those words. She rose from cover, stepping into the center aisle of the barn where the light from the loft windows spilled down like a pale spotlight. "I belonged to you the day I let you break me," she called, voice hard. That day never came. Mallory burst through a side window, glass and wood flying, his revolver already spitting fire. Colt dove, shoving Alara down behind a stall as bullets chewed the grain sacks, spilling yellow kernels onto the floor. Colt came up firing. One shot took Mallory's hat clean off. Another grazed his thigh. The outlaw cursed, lunging forward with a Bowie knife gleaming in the dim. Colt met him halfway, the two men crashing into the dirt, fists and steel tangling in a whirl of violence. The knife skidded across the barn floor. Mallory smashed a fist into Colt's jaw, but Colt twisted, slamming him into a support post hard enough to make the wood groan. They grappled, boots digging furrows in the dirt. Then a gunshot cracked, deafening in the enclosed space. Mallory's body went still. Colt turned to see Alara standing a few paces away, the revolver smoking in her hand, her chest rising and falling fast. Her eyes were locked on Mallory, as if daring him to get back up. He didn't. Outside, the remaining jackals spurred their horses, retreating into the night without their leader. The barn was left with the sound of the horses calming, the hiss of rain dripping from the roof, and the two of them breathing in the quiet aftermath. Colt straightened, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. "You all right?" Alara lowered the revolver, her fingers still tight on the grip. "I am now." They stood there for a long moment, the tension between them charged with more than just the fight. The danger had been beaten back, but something else had taken root. A bond forged in gun smoke and defiance. Colt broke the silence with a wry smile. "Guess you saved me this time." Alara stepped closer, her voice low. "Guess we're even." Outside, the prairie stretched silent under the clearing sky, the first stars peeking through. Inside, the two of them knew that whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. Chapter 8. The Morning After. The first light of morning bled slow and gentle over the prairie, spilling gold across the wet grass and setting the puddles in the yard aglow. The storm had washed the land clean, leaving the air sharp with the scent of sage and rain. Inside the barn, the dust had settled, and the night's echoes had faded into the hush of a new day. Colt Harrigan stepped out into the cool dawn, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. His jaw was stiff where Mallory's fist had caught him, but the ache felt like proof he'd still been standing when the sun came back. He scanned the horizon automatically, the habit of a man who knew trouble didn't always wait for an invitation. The bunkhouse door creaked open, and Alara stepped into the morning. She was barefoot, her hair loose and damp from the water trough, the blanket replaced by one of Colt's shirts that hung past her hips. In the early light, the bruises and burns on her skin looked softer, the hard edges blurred. For the first time since he'd found her in the dust, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. "Coffee?" Colt asked, holding up his mug. She gave a small smile, more real than any he'd seen from her yet. "Only if you got enough to share." He poured her a cup from the pot on the porch, and she took it, her fingers brushing his in a way that made him more aware of the space between them than the wide prairie ever could. They drank in companionable silence, listening to the distant lowing of the cattle and the soft creak of the windmill turning in the morning breeze. Alara glanced toward the barn, where the bodies of the fallen jackals had been taken away before sunrise. "They won't be back for a while." Colt nodded. "Word will get around that Mallory's done. Jackals will scatter. But the West doesn't stay quiet long." Her eyes searched his face, not for reassurance. He could tell she didn't want lies, but for some truth she could keep. "Then I'll be ready." "You planning to stay?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. She took a long sip of coffee before answering. "I don't have anywhere else, and I'm tired of running." Her gaze drifted over the yard, the corral, the line of cottonwoods marking the edge of his land. This place, it feels different. Colt says mug down on the porch rail. It's yours as much as mine if you want it. She looked at him sharply, as if expecting some condition to follow. When none came, her mouth curved into the faintest, almost shy smile. You're offering me a ranch? I'm offering you a chance, he said. To work, to heal, to make something that's yours, not theirs. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the guarded steel he'd come to know so well slipped away, revealing something warmer beneath. You've got a dangerous way of talking, Colt Harrigan. He chuckled. And you've got a dangerous way of looking at a man. The sun cleared the horizon, bathing the yard in full light. She set her coffee aside and stepped down into the wet grass, the hem of his shirt brushing her knees, turning toward the open land. She breathed deep, shoulders straightening as if she could feel the weight of the past sliding off her. Colt watched her, a slow pride swelling in his chest. This wasn't the broken woman he'd found wrapped in a blanket. This was someone reborn, still marked by what had been done to her, but no longer defined by it. She turned back to him, her smile clearer now, and said, All right, Harrigan, let's see if you can keep up with me. He tipped his hat, the brim shadowing the grin he couldn't hide. Darling, I'll do my damnedest. The morning wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of something new as they stood together, two stubborn souls on a patch of land that felt, for the first time, like home. The sun bled out over the horizon, spilling molten gold across the open plains. Shadows stretched long from the cottonwoods, and the wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush, stirring the grass in slow waves. From far off, the faint strains of saloon piano drifted, thin and wistful. Colt Harrigan stood by the corral, watching Jasper crop at the grass. Behind him, the bunkhouse door creaked open. Ilera stepped out, no longer in tattered blankets, but in worn riding clothes, her hair catching the sunset like fire. She walked to him with the easy stride of someone who belonged on this land. They won't be back, she said, her voice quiet but sure. Colt glanced at her, the ghost of a smile tugging his mouth. Didn't figure they would. Not after you put Mallory in the ground. For a moment, they just stood there, the air between them charged with the weight of what they'd survived. You could still leave, he said. Start fresh somewhere far from here. She shook her head, eyes never leaving his. I already have. Right here. He stepped closer, dust crunching under his boots, until there was nothing between them but breath. Then stay. With me, we'll build it together. Her hand slid into his, fingers lacing tight. You've already given me back my life, Colt. Might as well give me your heart, too. He kissed her as the last light sank into the plains, the wind wrapping around them like a promise, wild, untamed, and theirs to keep.